Chris Bosh was a unique player with a very interesting career. For most NBA fans, when we think about Bosh, the first thing that comes to mind is the Miami Heat's Big Three. More specifically, we think about him as the third option on that team. Someone who barely ever gets credit for the team's success, yet usually gets blamed for the team's losses if he doesn't play well. Pretty much the same thing happened to Kevin Love. That's part of the package when you play on a team with LeBron. Unfortunately for Bosh, his career all of a sudden came to an end, and not by his own decision either. How's it going, fellas? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a look at the career of Chris Bosh, his younger days in Toronto, his later days in Miami, and his downfall. Chris Bosh came into the NBA as part of the legendary 2003 draft class. He was the 4th overall pick, drafted right behind Carmelo Anthony and right ahead of Dwayne Wade. At the time, the Toronto Raptors were in an awkward situation. Vince Carter was still on the team, but he was getting impatient at the lack of supporting cast. The team previously missed the playoffs, and Carter's growing tension with the Raptors management was getting hard to ignore. It started to become a real problem, and it reflected on his play on the court, as his last few seasons were very underwhelming. The team in general was getting kinda old too, with a lot of guys over 30. As for Bosh, at just 19 years old, he quickly became the team's starting power forward. He showed a lot of promise early on. In his first couple years, he made major improvements in his game, and by his 3rd season, he was already leading his team in scoring and made his first All-Star team. At just 21 years old, he was averaging over 22 points and 9 rebounds a game. But what separated him from other bigs was that he was a very versatile big man, which was very rare at the time. He could post up a little bit, he could pass out of the block, he could face up and take you off the dribble, he had a clean mid-range jump shot, and he was a great free throw shooter, hovering around 80% for his career. Unfortunately, even though Bosh became a perennial all-star and continued to carry his team, he never had a good supporting cast in his entire time in Toronto. His second best teammate was either Mike James, who averaged over 20 points a game in one season, but he only played in one season for Toronto, or Jose Calderon, who, by the way, was really underrated back in the day. He was a very efficient scorer, a great three-point shooter, and a phenomenal passer, even leading the league in assist-to-turnover ratio in 2008. There was also Andrea Bargnani, former #1 pick, and he became the second leading scorer behind Bosh, which isn't exactly a good thing. As a result, the Toronto Raptors never got past the first round during the Chris Bosh era. In fact, in 7 seasons, they only won a total of 3 playoff games, and only made the playoffs twice. The highest number of regular season wins they ever got was 47, and considering the Eastern Conference was really weak at this time, that's kinda low. That doesn't sound good, but if you go through all the rosters, you'll understand why. Outside of Bosh, it was ridiculous how weak the rest of the rosters were. There were a couple reasons for that, but part of it had to do with players not wanting to play in Toronto. Nowadays, most players have warmed up to Toronto and enjoy playing there and wanting to play there, but back then it wasn't the case. They had to build their team solely through the draft, which is risky because if the draft picks don't pan out, then their team will never be good. During this era, their biggest trade was the Vince Carter trade. You'd expect them to get a great return for Carter since he was one of the best players in the league. But because Carter tanked his value by not trying at all, the Raptors didn't get much back and they had no leverage. They got back a couple of role players, including an older Alonzo Mourning who didn't even report to the team. Later on, they made a trade for Jermaine O'Neal, who was also a perennial all-star, just like Bosh, but he was getting older and the Bosh plus O'Neal experiment was not working. Then they traded O'Neal for Shawn Marion, who left after half a season. Basically, Bosh never had any help. I guess some of the blame could go to Brian Colangelo, the president and GM, but at the same time, it was a difficult situation to navigate. Although Toronto is a huge city and it's technically a huge market for basketball, but other players did not look at it that way. Raptors games were barely ever broadcasted on national television in the US, so barely anyone got to see them play. Other players and fans in general did not know much about the team. That's why they never saw any major free agents signing there. Of course, as the years went by, the perception of Toronto would change. Anyway, by the summer of 2010, Bosh would leave and join the Miami Heat. We all know how this deal went down. And right when he made his decision, he knew he had to make a sacrifice. His numbers dropped across the board as he averaged his lowest number of points, rebounds, and assists in the last 5 years. He also started taking about 35% of his shots between 16 feet and the 3-point line, which is basically mid-range distance. That was more than in any other season of his career. Bosh became a stretch 4. Not only did he sacrifice his stats, but everybody looked at him differently. People started to make fun of him and he became the butt of many jokes. During his first season in Miami, he saw guys like Stan Van Gundy call him a lapdog. Scottie Pippen called the Heat Big Three 2.5 men. Bosh knew about all these things being said. He responded by saying, "It is what it is. If somebody feels like they have to pick on somebody, pick on the quiet guy. If you want to win, sometimes you have to sacrifice things. I know everybody says they'll sacrifice whatever they can to have a chance to win, but until that really happens, you'll never know the emotions you have to go through in order to get it." It was clear that Bosh just wanted to win. Unlike LeBron and D. Wade, who made it deep into the playoffs before, Bosh never did. He never knew what it felt like to win and be one of the best teams in the league. There were times when he would go up to the podium and do his post-game press conferences, but nobody would have any questions for him.
Chris, how did you pinch your neck this morning?
Huh?
How did you pinch your neck this morning?
I woke up.
You woke up with a crick in your neck, or?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
They already asked LeBron and D. Wade all the questions they had. Things like this would happen frequently to Bosh. LeBron and Wade were a lot closer, and it was more of a big 2 plus 1. However, from like 2012 to 2014, Bosh would be more important than Wade. In my opinion, he became the second best player on the team while Wade started to slow down. Defensively, Bosh was a huge reason why Miami's aggressive blitzing of the pick and roll worked. He was quick enough to cover guards for a couple seconds, and he was long enough to recover and contest the paint. Without Bosh, there's no way the Heat would have won those championships. Most NBA fans did not see the impact he had, but the Heat organization did. After LeBron left Miami, they made it known that Bosh would be their new franchise cornerstone. On July 30th, 2014, Bosh officially re-signed with the Miami Heat to a max contract of 5 years, $118 million. That was way more than what Dwayne Wade got, which was only 2 years, $31 million. In the post-LeBron era, Wade and Bosh became the focal points, but unfortunately, they were no longer legit contenders. Even more unfortunate, in February of 2015, Bosh discovered that he had a blood clot in his lungs, forcing him to miss the rest of the season. The blood clot issues would reoccur once again in the following season. This issue would not go away, and despite Bosh's plea to get back onto the court and play, it was way too risky. He started to take blood thinners as well, which was dangerous while participating in a physical activity. If a person is on blood thinners, a couple of bumps and bruises could lead them to bleeding out of control. Even if he felt healthy and wanted to play again, he couldn't because he couldn't pass the physical. By the beginning of the 2016-17 season, Bosh kept insisting that he could play, but the risk was too high. Nobody wants to see a player die on the court. Before the 2017-18 season, Bosh and the Heat organization came to a mutual agreement. Bosh would retire, and because his blood clots were considered as a career-ending illness, the NBA ruled that his massive contract would no longer count against their salary cap. However, Bosh still hasn't given up and he still loves the game. Even recently, he said a couple times that he wanted to make a comeback and return to the NBA. But I don't see this happening. This was basically it. That was the end of Bosh's NBA career, and it was a very, very sad ending. He couldn't even retire on his own terms, and he was still very productive until his very last game. And that sums up the career of Chris Bosh. He was an 11-time All-Star and a 2-time champion. He only made one All-NBA team in his entire career, which is actually kinda weird. You'd expect an 11-time All-Star to have more All-NBA selections, but that wasn't the case. There was a lot of competition at his position, so it makes sense. He He never made any all-defensive teams either, but I think in his last few seasons in Miami, he definitely played like an all-NBA defender. Bosh really changed the game too. He was one of the first big men who could do everything. Score, rebound, pass, defend, shoot, switch onto guards. He had no weaknesses in his game. Imagine if he was in his prime right now. His playstyle would be a perfect fit for the modern NBA. He's without question a Hall of Famer. Anyway, that's all folks. Thank you everyone so much for watching. What are your thoughts on Chris Bosh? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.